Joining me is the Australian's national editor, Dennis Shanahan. I made the point, Dennis, at the top of the show, Labor won an election pretty much on a small target policy agenda, but it's been anything but small targets since then. I went through a whole list of things, including IR, market interventions, a voice campaign, etc. But I think probably the most substantial clue we've got to the forward agenda is this essay from Jim Chalmers. As I said, it's Whitlam-esque. He's from Labor's right. He's very much said he's in the mould of Hawke and Keating. This is not Hawke and Keating. What did you make of it?
Oh, well, look, first of all, I'd congratulate Jim Chalmers for actually putting something out there. We saw too little from Labor before the election, and Jim Chalmers has put out quite a thoughtful essay, 6,000 words, to say where he intends to go. Now, what it actually does is start to move away from the precepts of the Hawke-Keating era, the Howard Costello era, those 2 decades of very good government that delivered real wage increases, did away with deficits and provided $1 billion investment, $100 billion investment fund. Now, I think what Jim Chalmers is trying to do, trying to shake things up, he's trying to say we're going to have to do things differently, but it's based on evidence that I don't necessarily agree with. He says we didn't turn out well after the pandemic. Well, I think on the world scale, we did extremely well. And I think the other thing that he's doing, he's basing it not on a national strategic outlook, but on the idea of transition to renewables being at the heart of this policy. Now, that is a reality, but all the time he is now relying on transition to renewables as the key economic structure, and he's relying a great deal on partnerships with philanthropists. Now, these are some of them billionaires who have made billions overnight out of websites and high tech, and they now feel that they can have a say in government. Now, I think that this is a danger for Jim Chalmers. He's put out some ideas, not enough concrete ideas and proposals, and he's left himself open to characterisation, mistreatment and misquoting. And so it's what he should have expected given the way this 6,000-word essay actually lacks real development, real practical advice. Peta Credlin came out with the intergenerational report. There's none of that in Jim Chalmers' essay.
So how much of this is him flying a kite? You're right, it is 6,000 words, it's a substantial piece of work. It's more than a soundbite. So it's very deliberate in that sense. How much of this has got the fingerprints of the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office on there as some sort of imprimatur for him to go down this path? And I guess my biggest concern is, as someone who's been on the other side of politics, you've always relied, as you look across the chamber, on the Labor right to keep the Labor left and the socialist intentions under control. Now, if this is what the new generation of the Labor right looks like, and we've got Bowen from the right intervening in markets, we've got Burke going crazy on IR, if this is what the new right is, well, heaven help the country.
Well, I actually think this is the old right, Peter. I think that what Jim Chalmers is doing is he's talking about the heritage of the people that he has worked with previously, people like Wayne Swan, who was from the right, but also worked on the idea of postcodes, of values, and people on lower incomes not getting a share of the profits. Now, there are people, of course, saying, oh, this is socialism at its worst and so forth, but this is what Jim Chalmers stands for.
You can't talk about Swan and reference what he said without looking at Swan's results. The debt burden, the crazy spending, the pink bats, the cash for clunkers, all of that craziness. Like, let's judge Labor not on what they say, let's judge Labor on what they do. And maybe I've been tough on Swanee all this time, thinking the madness was driven by the Treasurer. Maybe his old Chief of Staff was running the show. Maybe the worst of the excesses of Swan belong with Chalmers.
Well, you asked about fingerprints. What I'm saying is I think Jim Chalmers' fingerprints are all over this. Jim Chalmers' intentions well into the future are full of this essay. This is about Jim Chalmers and his heritage. It is not as simple as left or right, a woke or not woke. This is a long tradition, and I think this is where Jim Chalmers talks about Hawke and Keating and their success, but the need to be different. Don't forget, in his assessment of that failure over the last decade or so, includes the Gillard government when Wayne Swan was Treasurer. So I think that there is no doubt there were real problems with Wayne Swan as Treasurer. I think this is Jim Chalmers standing up as Jim Chalmers without threatening the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, but he is trying to put his own view of what we'll see. Whether it works or not, entirely different question.
Well, Parliament's back next week, Dennis Shanahan. I reckon hold on to our hats. It's going to be a wild ride. Thank you for
I think the phony war is over, Peter. It'll be back to real politics next week.
I think you're spot on.